So the takeaway is, for sake of hormone health, time-restricted feeding is compatible with quality hormone health, even in high-performing athletes. Based on everything we know and that we've discussed, I would not suggest that people restrict their feeding window to less than 8 hours, especially if they're training hard on a regular basis. And it's not just athletes that should pay attention to this. When we are working very hard, when we are psychologically stressed, when we are studying for exams, or we are in conflict with somebody on a regular basis, that creates a stress in the body that's very similar to that of physical training. The body and brain don't distinguish between physical stress and mental stress. It's all nervous system. Remember that. It's just cortisol and adrenaline. There's no special hormone just for physical stress versus psychological stress. So again, in thinking about what sort of feeding window will be right for you, we arrive back at this 8-hour time bin that seems more or less flexible for most conditions, even high-performing elite athletes. And I would say, just by logical extension, even for people that have a lot of stress in their life. And I personally wouldn't suggest that people who have a lot of stress in their life, or the potential for stress in their life, shorten their feeding window much shorter than 8 hours, because then you would expect that you would start to increase some of the inflammatory markers, you would increase the stress hormones, and you would be decreasing things like testosterone and estrogen and some of the sex steroid hormones. So again, it's all about context, and the 8-hour window, it isn't holy, but seems to be a really useful guide to extract the great health benefits, of which there are many and of which we've discussed, from intermittent fasting, time-restricted feeding, and yet that it could still be compatible with decent social schedules and for maintaining hormone health. In keeping with this, for women that are trying to maintain ovulatory cycles, or for couples that are trying to get pregnant, I think it's also important to not create a feeding window that's too short. The relationship between feeding and body fat stores and glucose and leptin and hormones is a well-established one, and we can summarize it very easily here, although I've done several episodes related to this previously on optimizing hormone health. But basically, we undergo puberty when there's enough food and there's enough body fat that the body fat sends a signal to the brain called leptin, that's a hormone that comes from body fat, signals to the brain to turn on puberty. That's puberty, but even as adults, for women that are menstruating, there needs to be sufficient leptin signaling to the brain in order to maintain ovulation because of the way that the brain communicates with the pituitary and the ovaries. Similarly, for men, fasting or extreme exercise plus fasting, we now know reduces testosterone. Its impacts are not exactly clear. However, if you reduce food intake, either in total calories or in duration too much, you will suffer a drop in sperm counts. Fertility will drop. And this makes sense. The body is communicating to the brain whether or not conditions are sufficient in the body to reproduce and to presumably and hopefully support the health and well-being of those offspring. So there's a logical link between body fat and eating and how much food is available to you and how long it's available to you and the signals in the brain that allow for reproductive success. I think 8 hours is kind of a nice minimum to adhere to based on everything that we've covered today. And for some people, time-restricted feeding is not going to be compatible with hormone health for them. For them, eating more meals spread throughout the day, presumably smaller meals, same caloric intake, is going to be more beneficial for their hormones. This is something that is going to be individual and is going to have to be determined on an individual basis. However, if you're going to try time-restricted feeding, I do want to remind you that taking a period of 3 to 7 or ideally 10 days to transition into it, not just flipping from eating to 3 meals a day that span from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m.,